Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Very well, thank you. And we're going to try to straighten out some confusion that's been around for a couple years now.
Yeah.
And matter of fact, it was confusion enough, but it was deliberate.
Yeah.
It was a fake report. Can you believe that? And we had our administration and Britain agreeing that, Assad was gassing his own people on purpose, which never made any sense. And it was more than once that they did this. But it was an excuse to teach them a lesson. So we went ahead and joined in the bombing following this. But this is the story about Douma. When there was some so-called incidents where there was gassing used, which there was a report. But it turns out now with a revelation of what information from Wikileaks and others, and a very good article by Caitlin, this shows that it was all a cover-up. It was all lying and blames, and the whole thing was designed to promote our foreign policy. We say, well, there's a little bit of confusion there. We'll give them an excuse. But it's always Assad has to go. And in my own mind, I don't think that policy has changed. When you think of our presence there, we talk about leaving, but we don't really leave. We talk about turning over to the Syrians, but no, we get very much involved in the oil business over there. So it's ongoing, and unfortunately, we didn't leave. We should have never gone in. The only solution is going to be is when we leave. But this is a good demonstration of how complex it gets.
Yeah, and it's also a good demonstration of how important Wikileaks is and why they're doing their best to silence and why they're torturing Assange. Because we never would have known this if Wikileaks had not published this new set of documents. And what these documents are is showing the internal dissent within the OPCW, the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons, which is a UN agency, about the Douma final report of the so-called gas attack, which took place, you remember, back in the spring of 18. President Trump, of course, listening to his neocons around him, said, we know who did it. 2 hours later, we know who did it. It was Assad. A couple of days later, he lobbed 100 Tomahawk missiles. All told, probably cost about $1 billion to blow up a bunch of stuff in Syria before the inspectors were even on the ground to investigate. We know who did it. So then it took a year to finally put this report together. And when it was put together, the people who were on the ground, on the fact-finding mission, who were there, who were experts, they looked at the final report, and it was the opposite of everything they concluded. And so what WikiLeaks has shown us is the internal memos of these inspectors. 20 of them expressed concerns that the final report did not reflect their conclusions as a fact-finding mission.
This organization, OPCW, is a UN organization that would make us suspect, but it also indicates that there can be some good people, even in an organization like this, but they were squeezed out.
Yeah.
I think at the mention of the 20 people who were disagreeing with the report. And they of course, get blamed as well once the truth comes out. But this was started, OPCW was organized in 1997, and they have 500 employees. I guess you need a lot of people when you're covering up stuff. You have to cover up when you don't want to hear it. So they weren't truth finders, and yet they weren't. That group was never the group that had the worst reputation.
Yeah.
They would come up, and evidently the people who wanted to tell the truth were totally controlled by those who wanted to perpetuate the war. Assad has to go. But some of the lies told are a little bit entertaining, even though scary. They said the gas attack came by Assad dropping tanks of gas, cylinders of gas, from airplanes and having them explode and gas these people. But somebody came along and one inspector said, yeah, but why aren't there any dents on the canister?
Yeah.
Absolutely none. So they were lying from the beginning, and yet those inconsistencies weren't reported, and it wasn't even a debate. Maybe here, maybe that. No, they came up proof that Assad did it.
And remember last time we talked about this, we reported the previous whistleblower who said that the fact-finding mission was brought into a room by their superior officer in which there were U.S. officials from several unnamed agencies who read them the Riot Act and said, this is what you guys are going to conclude, full stop. And they felt pressure, they said. So obviously what's happening here is they wanted to make the report fit, the conclusion fit the political desires of the U.S. and U.K. administrations. But what's amazing, we learned from the WikiLeaks also, again, is that only one member of the fact-finding mission, of the people on the ground looking at the stuff, only one member was allowed to contribute to the final report. What the OPCW bigwigs did is they assembled an entirely new team based from people who were not on the ground, who didn't go there. Most likely they were based in Turkey. They wrote the final report. So they sent the team over. The team did all the investigation. They gave all their evidence, and they said, okay, you guys are dismissed. They name a whole new team based in Turkey that hadn't gone to Syria to do the final report, and again, concluding the opposite, changing things, literally changing things to the opposite of what they found.
Well, and I guess there's no reason to be optimistic that now that the truth is coming out, significant truth, that all of a sudden maybe the media will, the major media will come up and explain this to the people. But I don't think I've seen any reports yet on national television. But thank goodness that we do have people on the internet that can get this information out, but it's still tough getting the truth out.
In fact, Tarek Haddad is a journalist, and he was pitching the story to Newsweek. He was pitching it everywhere to several different places, and he was forbidden from writing about it. In fact, what they said is, Bellingcat, which is this phony investigative company that's funded by the U.S. government, they've already concluded that as well that Assad did it. So we don't want to hear any of this controversy. But you touched on something that's really important, because the central importance to this narrative that Assad gassed his own people is that he dropped these gas cylinders through a metal-reinforced concrete roof, and they landed on a bed, and they let out all the gas and killed all these people on the top of a building. And it has to be, this has to be true for the narrative, because remember, Assad did not control Douma at the time. They were on the verge of taking control, but the only way they could get that gas in there was because they had air superiority. So if this central tenet, this central plank that he dropped it from the air falls out, then the whole thing falls apart. And this is why you mentioned Ian Henderson. He's fascinating because he is an expert in metallurgy, chemical engineering, artillery, and defense R&D. And what he found is that his conclusions were not included. He was the guy there to find out, to figure out if this canisters really were dropped. And here's what he actually concluded. And this was in the draft, taken out before the final. The fact-finding mission team is unable to provide satisfactory explanations for the relatively moderate damage to the cylinders allegedly dropped from an unknown height compared to the destruction caused to the rebar reinforced concrete roofs. In the case of location 4, how the cylinder ended up on the bed, given the point at which it allegedly penetrated the room, remains unclear. Here's the key. The team considers that further studies by specialists in metallurgy and structural engineering and mechanics are required to provide an authoritative assessment. They can't figure out. And here's what Henderson himself concluded. He said, the dimensions, characteristics, and appearance of the cylinders were inconsistent with what would have been expected in the case of either cylinder being delivered from an aircraft. He wrote instead that the cylinders had been most likely manually placed, staged, to make it look like they were dropped.
Here was one headline dealing with this on the internet. It says, toning down inconsistencies, excluding experts, and ignoring evidence.
Yeah.
I think you'd go along with that.
That's exactly what they did.
This whole thing always asks, gets me thinking, well, how do we prevent this? What do we do? Does this mean that the people in the OPCW just aren't good people? Well, yeah, it's gotten worse over the years. They act like government. They act like bureaucrats. Yeah. And there are good people, and they get shunned or silenced or fired and all these things. So I don't see the solution for these kind of problems as all of a sudden getting better people. It's sort of like arguing what we need are better bureaucrats in Washington to manage government programs to get rid of waste and fraud. But the whole system's based on waste and fraud. So that's not a solution. So I think, once again, when we see episodes like this, it just pushes us right back to, the policy itself. I mean, that we get involved in this, and really with Syria, I guess we could lay a lot of blame on Hillary and Obama. We have to get rid of Assad, but all the other people who've gone along with it. I imagine the deep state's not complaining about that position. They might be complaining about this news.
Yeah.
They're going to complain if the truth gets out, and that's what's happened. Long term, truth does come out. When there's a crisis, whether it's 9/11 or with the Kennedy assassination or whatever. Once time passes and people have a better understanding or a more open mind, they find out what the truth is. This one is coming out fairly fast, but is it going to change our policy?
Yeah.
And right now, I see headlines talking about, well, we're bringing some troops home from the Middle East. And then right below that, we're sending the troops to the Middle East.
Yeah.
It just goes on and on. And of course, we want to move our troops, but everybody knows where we would recommend they move them back here, and make the United States safe from the bureaucrats.
Well, the old saying, he who pays the piper calls the tune. And that's the case with the OPCW, especially the higher ups. Probably a lot of them are Americans, and probably a lot of them also work for the CIA. Let's be honest. But here's what happens. The U.S. government provides an enormous percentage of the funding for this organization. So someone from the U.S. calls them up and says, hey, we got a problem. We need this report to show that Assad gassed his people. I don't care what you have to do it. This is what we need. You want to keep your paycheck? You want to keep your job? I mean, that's really what it looks like, because it's impossible to chalk it up to incompetence. When you get a whole new team in because the other team that was actually on the ground came to the wrong conclusions. And the other stuff, we talked about it when we did this last time, they reported that the chlorine gas was present. But they took out the part where they said it was a tiny couple of parts per billion, as if someone had sprayed a little bit of bleach in the bathroom. So they left that part out. And this is the other part left out of the draft report. And this is the conclusion of the team on the ground based on what they saw, that these people could not have died. The symptoms that the white helmets, when they were videoing this, the propaganda video, the symptoms were not consistent. Some of the signs and symptoms described by witnesses and noted in photos and videos recordings taken by witnesses of the alleged victims are not consistent with exposure to chlorine-containing choking or blood agents such as chlorine gas, etc., etc. Specifically, the rapid onset of heavy buccal and nasal frothing in many victims, as well as the color of the secretions, is not indicative of intoxication from such chemicals. So they wanted to make it look bad, so they put a lot of foam and everything on them, but that's not what you get when you have a chlorine gas.
But I'm really at a position now, and you may have a firmer position, that I don't think everybody knows the absolute truth, other than the fact that there wasn't this gas explosion coming from Assad. That's what is important. But you say people are influenced by dollars, and I think that's very true. But I think people both are just on the take all the time, constantly, but there's also people who, I can bend a little bit and do this. I'll concede this. I've saw a lot of people rationalize. We can't expect all that, so we'll just get involved for so much here. And that's what happens. They sort of rationalize, because otherwise they might have. Occasionally, you might come across a person who had trouble sleeping with himself. So they do. They say, this is the best thing we can do, and we'll do our best to make it an honest report. And then finally they get caught, and the lies persist. And that, of course, we even witness that going on in our own elections here, how the stories are told and how the fake excuses are made, and how the news is canned and whatnot. So finding the truth really is the big job, that happens. And I don't believe that governments have a very good reputation for revealing the truth. I think they have it their dollars, justify what they do. Their power and their dollars, it's always to help the people, to help the people, and we have to do that, and we have to compromise. But I would hope that when they read these kind of stories or realize the truth, they'd come our way a little bit and say, yeah, there were some people saying that we shouldn't have gotten involved. Even our president claimed, in his campaign, we shouldn't be involved there. We should come out here, and yet it doesn't happen. But there may be this may be recognizing how powerful the deep state is, and I don't think they've been weakened lately. I think they are deadly serious about maintaining power.
Exactly. Well, as Dr. Paul said at the time of the so-called gas attack, this smells like a false flag. Assad, it makes no sense. Why would he gas his own people right when he's about to take victory in Douma and get rid of the terrorists? Doesn't make sense. And of course, he was called all sorts of names because of that. It also says a lot about the way our Congress and the way Washington works, because they're desperately looking for a crime to impeach the president for, when here's one right under their noses. He proceeded on the basis of false information without congressional authorization and bombed a sovereign country, killing innocent people, destroying a bunch of stuff, and taking $1 billion out of our pockets to do it. Bingo, there you have it. There's your impeachment. But guess what? The Democrats love this kind of bombing. They love it. And so they're not going to do anything about this. And the other thing it tells us, Dr. Paul, is about the mainstream media in our country. Their job is not to inform us. It's to reinforce the government narratives. That's why they're not writing about this at all. And that's why I fear when we talk about it, we're going to be subject to a lot of pressure. And I think people recognize that they're only getting stuff from shows like ours and others. We gained another 2,000 subscribers over the weekend after we announced that we hit 200K. People are interested in hearing this. We're grateful to you for subscribing, by the way, and I hope you'll continue to encourage your friends and others to do so. But there is a lot of danger trying to tell the truth.
That's for sure. And it's also the reason that they wouldn't join in the criticism. The Democrats wouldn't jump on this and say, oh, Trump is violating his oath of office as he's overstepping his bound. It's because it's their war as much as anything. I mean, it wasn't Trump that orchestrated this war. And to a degree, I think he has some sincere thoughts about reducing it, but not enough. I'm just such a firm believer in, if you concede half of a principle, you've conceded 100% of the principle, and you have no defense. That's why I think your defense on whether it's foreign policy or economic policy or monetary policy, you describe the 100% position, not because we're naive and say, oh, this is perfect, it's going to solve all our problems. It's that if you start there, the opposition has to refute it. So we should continue to do what we're doing and make them refute why non-interventionism is a bad policy. And that doesn't mean that it's all of a sudden going to be perfect, but the position is, and the theory should be as perfect as you can get it, because their position of interventionism is an open door policy of doing whatever you want, depending on who gets the most money and who's going to get the contracts and all these things. So that's why I take this position that people say, Brian, you're too radical. You take this position and it's not practical. I'll tell you what I think is impractical. And that is going from the middle and saying, well, a little bit of socialism, a little bit of inflation, a little bit of bureaucracy, a little bit of intervention around the world. A little bit is okay because we don't want the whole thing. I think it's over and done with because you can't resist it. And that is why this country is bankrupt. We're bankrupt morally, financially, and we are in a position now where there's a lot of problems going on in the world. Superficially, the world is wonderful, richer than ever, and it's not going to affect the United States. But I tell you what, it is going to, because we have been the orchestrator of the empire. We have been paying for it, and we've been paying for it on borrowed money, and the debt is not eternal. It can't last forever. I saw the other day somebody said, recognizing that maybe this debt is too big. Maybe we should go back to the ancient tradition of a jubilee, and the jubilee is going to come probably not because it's legislated, it's just that people aren't going to pay the debt. It's not payable, but we ought to be prepared for it. And for me, the preparation is understanding the preciseness of what a free society is all about and the preciseness of what the government role should be, and that from my viewpoint, should be for the preservation of liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, and please come back soon to the Liberty Report.